We will be joined by NBA insider Brandon Scoop B. Robinson here in just a moment. Again, our Sixers coverage here on 97.3 ESPN being brought to you by Trifecta Therapeutics in Glassboro, South Jersey's premier sports rehabilitation and physical therapy center, treating the pros and the Joes. Visit them online at trifectatherapeutics.com. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get to more of your guys' comments and thoughts in just a bit. But joining us right now on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline for our Inside the Sixers, right after the ABA trade deadline hit, a couple moves trickling in here after the fact. But joining us right now is Brandon Scoop B. Robinson. My friend, how you doing today?
Tired. How are you?
So that's the first question. How much coffee have you drank today?
None. I'm not a coffee guy.
Okay, you're not a coffee guy.
I'm still adjusting my camera as I'm talking to you. Apologies. It's crazy. So fell asleep about 3-4 o'clock this morning, and I got a text message from a guy that fills me in, and I'm scrolling on my other phone now. I got a text message this morning. Orlando, this was at 11:14 a.m. Orlando will be clearing house today. Fournier and Gordon are gone. I expect Porter to be flipped. Orlando's going for the nuclear option. And I was asleep. I woke up at noon. Woj had already tweeted it.
So hey, listen, it happens, right? I actually saw Bobby Marks mention earlier to this morning. He mentioned that I forget what there was a big trade that happened a year or two ago, and he said he slept through the whole thing and missed the whole thing himself. So
wow,
so you're in the same company with Bobby Marks. That's not too bad, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. It's a long, arduous process, and here we are. The Philadelphia 76ers locally did get George Hill, who was expected. He was kind of like their security blanket. And a little known fact, he shot 46% coming off the bench from Milwaukee. And I think that's going to help exponentially at the guard position. Kyle Lowry, was a guy that was on their depth chart as far as a want. Lonzo Ball was another guy as well that the Sixers were looking to move to get. But ultimately, Lonzo stays in New Orleans. The Bulls also were in the hunt, but they ended up getting better by fortifying the big man position and getting Nikola Vucevic. And here we are now.
All right, so let's start with you mentioned George Hill, but I think that pivots to another question. I think a lot of people are surprised that Kyle Lowry is still a Raptor. And you mentioned on your own Twitter, you said, listen, Houston came in last minute with a real competitive conversation, real competitive offer. It feels like for teams like the Heat and the Sixers, they were like, listen, we would like Kyle, but maybe what you're asking for is not what we're willing to give up. Is that accurate?
Yes. Many people thought that this was going to be a slow day. Many people thought that this was going to be a day of, not many moves, but, the Lowry situation is kind of similar to the Lonzo Ball situation and kind of similar to Chris Paul during the offseason, where you see that, people are in need for a valiant point guard who can legitimately guide this team deep into the playoffs. And, the Lakers were in on the Lowry situation as well. I tweeted this afternoon about that. It's a situation that it is what it is. George Hill is a good security blanket for them, specifically because, the Thunder are all in on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And you kind of saw that he would be special, particularly, during his time playing in OKC with Chris Paul. And that's kind of carried over. Actually, it really started in Los Angeles with the Clippers. If I'm not mistaken, he was an all-rookie first teamer. And, he's done well. So, George Hill is a guy that, I think, coming from where he came from, I think he's in a good position to help lead this 76ers team.
And also for the Sixers, they didn't give up Thibault. They didn't give up Maxey. They didn't give up none of the guys that are real contributors. I mean, Terrence Ferguson has barely played at all this year. I mentioned before you came on, watch Ferguson go to the Knicks and play like 20 minutes a game, become a Tibbs guy. But in Philadelphia, you didn't give up a ton of guys outside of Bradley. So getting Hill was more than just you're upgrading your bench. You're also not getting rid of the guys who are also making this team competitive.
And you're adding, solid defense. The only knock that anybody has had on George Hill is missing those 2 free throws in the NBA Finals against the Cavs, against the Warriors. It happens. And, ultimately, though, I think George Hill was a good pickup. I also think Rajon Rondo going to the Clippers was a great pickup as well. I know that, the Clippers were in on the Lowry sweepstakes as well. And, they kind of gave up on that notion and, did what they needed to do.
Before we get to the Western Conference, I wanted to do a little whip around to the Eastern Conference teams of what we have left outside the Sixers, because obviously, even though the Sixers are the 1 seed, the Nets are the favorite in the East. So we all know that everyone is building or trying to set themselves up to try to face off with the Nets, right? So let's look at the Heat real quick. Oladipo, I think it's a good deal for the Heat. They didn't give up a ton to get him. And you think about a team with Oladipo, Butler, Hero, Robinson, Bam. That's a pretty nice lineup going down the stretch into the postseason.
Yeah, I like the Heat. And the Heat were, really all in on trying to make something happen. As I've told you over the last couple of months, not just that the Heat were surging, but, they're looking to add, either a Boogie Cousins or a LaMarcus Aldridge, and even an Andre Drummond. Cleveland, was looking to add pieces to their roster, and it's not a foregone conclusion, that they were just going to cut him so that he could be waived. Or cut him so that he could be signed elsewhere, or buy him out so he could go elsewhere. It seems that that's the thing now. But Cleveland were definitely a team looking to make moves, and Miami was a name that I had heard in the whole restructuring of their roster. But when you look at Miami, they were very, 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 very focused on retaining Tyler Hero and adding a point guard that could score but could also lead that team. They are the NBA's Eastern Conference champions, the reigning Eastern Conference champions. You make mention of the Nets and at large, but Miami's looking to get better, and now they're going to focus on the buyout market. Otto Porter Jr. could be a guy that could be bought out and looked at, as well as LaMarcus Aldridge and Andre Drummond as well.
Brandon Scoop B. Robinson joining us here in the Boardwalk kind of hotline for Inside the Sixers here on 97.3 ESPN. As the NBA trade line is just about 36 minutes old at this point, and we're just kind of reviewing what happened. Let's bump in another team in the Eastern Conference. The Celtics, all right, you got Evan Fournier, and you got rid of Tyson, you got Wagner. I mean, I feel this is like the most underwhelming situation for Danny Ainge, because I think anybody with 2 eyes can tell you that the Celtics outside of Tatum and Brown, if Kemba's not on the floor, they're woefully outgunned compared to a lot of teams in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I think the Celtics are definitely in an interesting situation. I'll tell you, during the offseason, the Celtics and the Houston Rockets did speak. And, there was a James Harden, discussion on the board there, and they turned it down. I know Kemba Walker was in that conversation. I know, that the Celtics tried to add point guard pieces and big man pieces during the offseason. And, Tristan Thompson was also another name that was on the board. They were looking to move, but they did get Evan Fournier, and, they added Mo Wagner as well. And I think that they're just trying to make small little moves to just strengthen their roster. I mean, this is a team that, did lose to the Miami Heat in the NBA playoffs. And, this is a Brooklyn, Philadelphia, Miami Eastern Conference from my vantage point.
Now, you mentioned Milwaukee there for a moment. How surprised are you that Milwaukee hasn't added anything else since the PJ Tucker trade? I think they could have maybe added some more, but it seems like is it fair to say they're content? They're happy with what they got right now? Do they feel like maybe Drew Holiday missing time was part of it?
PJ Tucker is in a situation similar to Dallas during the offseason, where they made a move and brought in, James Johnson, the third, to be an enforcer. And I think PJ Tucker is that James Johnson for Milwaukee. You need rim protection. You need someone who can guard positions 3 through 5, and in a pinch can probably even guard position 2. He's a veteran. He knows his role. And Giannis and company, I think, are in a good position. I think we often leave Milwaukee out of certain conversations because everybody is so enamored by Brooklyn and Philadelphia. But yeah, that's what I think. I think at the end of the day, I do think that Milwaukee is in a good position, but you're still competing with Philadelphia and Brooklyn.
At Scoopy on Twitter, NBA insider Brandon Scoopy Robinson joining us on the Boardwalk kind of hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. You mentioned Rondo a little bit ago. Let's jump over to the West here. I love the Rondo move for the Clippers because it's almost like the Clippers are turning around and saying, we're this serious because you look at the Western Conference, if the Lakers drop to a lower seed, you might have to play them in the early rounds instead of the Western Conference Finals if you're the Clippers. And to have Rondo instead of Lou Williams to me is a huge deal because Rondo, he brings so much to the table and he kind of fits with what Ty Lue wants to do out there as well.
Yeah, I think you bring up a very valid point about Rajon Rondo. I mean, that move to Atlanta, I spoke to someone during the bubble close to Rondo who shared that, he wanted to extend his role as a coach after his career was over in a way similar to Jason Kidd. And what Jason Kidd did, and even Derek Fisher did. But ultimately, that Houston experience didn't work. I think this was kind of a situation, the Atlanta situation was an interesting situation because they didn't start off as well as many expected. And, they ultimately got rid of their coach and then brought in Nate McMillan. And I don't know that there was any issues with McMillan and with Rondo, but what I do know is that when it comes down to it, the Clippers were a team that were interested in Rondo during the offseason. And I think as much as, when you look at Rondo and what he brings to the table, this is a guy that was very instrumental in guiding the Lakers in the NBA Finals. And he moves across the hall, the Staples Center in Los Angeles. He's able to guide a team that he and Ty Lue and has a relationship, but also I think one thing that you got to add is the buyout market. You have to look at what the Clippers did and what they could add could actually help. Number one, Andre Drummond is a guy that, many people think that it's just a Brooklyn, myself included, a Brooklyn, Los Angeles Lakers market. I think the Clippers, if he's bought out, are a team that could be interested in him and could make a deep run, particularly because you're looking at Anthony Davis's injury. You're looking at LeBron James's injury, and it's not a foregone conclusion that they're going to the finals. We'd like to see a Nets-Lakers matchup. Some people would like to see it. Some people would like to see Lakers-Sixers. But ultimately, the Clippers are still a team to be reckoned with, and they added a solid veteran presence in Rajon Rondo.
You mentioned the buyout market. Obviously, Drummond, you said, has a very specific market. But what about guys? We're hearing LaMarcus Aldridge could be bought out. We know Boogie Cousins is hanging out there. Are any of those guys potential options for the Sixers, or are there markets elsewhere?
I'm not sure as of now. I may actually take your advice and drink some coffee, but prior to the trading deadline, when I look at the buyer's market, the Nets and the Lakers were a team that had interest in Boogie Cousins, specifically the Miami Heat as well. The Boston Celtics would be an intrigue, but I like the Heat. I like Boston. We got to kind of see what the Nets are doing, as well as the Lakers. But when you look at LaMarcus Aldridge, he has a relationship with Sean Marks, them coming from the San Antonio Spurs system. Thiago Splitter is within the Nets system as well, so there's a relationship there, as well as Jacques Vaughn. But ultimately, I think when it's all said and done, it's going to be a very interesting market. I mentioned Otto Porter as well. There's a lot. Teague will be waived by the Orlando Magic. And there's a lot to consider there. So, yeah.
Is there any player or team that we have not discussed yet that either surprised you or you have some lingering questions about?
I like Portland's move to get Norman Powell. I like that move. I think I like the Portland Trailblazers. I like Damian Lillard. I like CJ McCollum. They need more scorers because you saw in the playoffs last year against the Lakers, they kind of went radio silent. Some of that was injuries to Dame. You got an insurance policy with Norman Powell.
My only concern with that trade is that Gary Trent was playing very well for them this year, especially when CJ McCollum was out. So you gave up a guy to get a guy kind of thing. It was almost like I feel like Powell is like better than Trent, but I don't know how much better. You know what I mean?
No, I do know what you mean. It's yeah. I like Gary Trent Jr. though too. I've seen him play some pretty tough games, but yeah, it was an interesting trade. I to be honest with you, I would have liked. You talk about the buyout market. I'd like to see LaMarcus Aldridge return to Portland and help, because I feel like you waited for Nurkic to come back. And this is me just saying from a basketball optic situation, not a what I've heard. In this situation, when I look at Portland, I feel like they've got a good solid machine with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum and Carmelo Anthony. But when I look at that situation, yeah, I definitely think Portland is probably a dark horse in the NBA's Western Conference.
He is NBA insider Brandon Scoop B. Robinson. He joined us here on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline at Scoop B on Twitter. And, of course, he, like all guests, appear on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline. Brandon, I appreciate you jumping on. I know it's a crazy, crazy day. When it comes to coffee, I have mine over here. I recommend the dark Cuban roast. That's my personal choice.
I like it. I may take you up on that. A little oat milk or almond milk and call it a day.
Now, that's an interesting choice. Oatmeal almond milk. See, I'm just straight black with a little sugar. That's how I go.
I like it.
I'm very simple like that. I'm not very complicated. I'll leave the fashion to you, my friend.
Oh boy, here you go. Brother, thank you for always for giving me the opportunity to be myself.
I always appreciate you jumping on. Go jump back on your phone so you can get some more scoops, okay?
Yes, sir. I'll talk to you.
All right. He is at Scoop B on Twitter and Instagram is where you get the full Scoop B experience. And as all guests, he appeared on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline here on Inside the Sixers, being brought to you by Trifecta Therapeutics in Glassboro, South Jersey's premier sports rehabilitation and physical therapy center, treating the pros and the Joes. Visit them online at trifectatherapeutics.com.